Elias Thorne stood before the skeletal remains of the old Blackwood Point lighthouse, the salt-laced wind whipping at his worn jacket. Beside him, a German shepherd the size of a grizzly bear sat with unnerving stillness, its massive head tilted toward the crumbling tower. To any sane person, the scene was one of terminal decay. A broken man and his monstrous dog staring at a ruin not worth the land it stood on. But they were both wrong, because the dog Odin wasn't just a dog, and the lighthouse wasn't just a ruin. It was a vault, and Odin knew the combination to a $200 million secret buried within its stones. A secret that had already killed one person Elias loved, and was now coming back to kill him. If this story of a man and his dog finding redemption against all odds resonates with you, we would be so grateful if you'd support our channel by subscribing. It helps us continue to bring you stories like this every week. We'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight. Please let us know in the comments below. The journey to this broken precipice had begun a year earlier, in the suffocating silence of a fourth-floor walk-up that smelled of dust and stale grief. Elias, a former Army Ranger honorably discharged with a soul full of shrapnel no surgeon could remove, was a ghost haunting his own life. The world had gone gray the day he lost his wife, Sarah, to a phantom black sedan in a hit-and-run that was never solved. His guilt was a constant companion. He'd been arguing with her on the phone moments before, a stupid fight over something he couldn't even remember. That final, angry conversation was the soundtrack to his lonely existence. One morning, staring into the bottom of a whiskey glass, he decided the silence had gone on long enough. But as he reached for the bottle of pills in the medicine cabinet, a sharp, insistent whining cut through the haze. A friend, worried about him, had dropped off a puppy a week before, the runt of a German shepherd litter. A pathetic, tiny thing Elias had mostly ignored. Now the puppy, barely able to stand, was wedged between him and the bathroom door, blocking his path, its oversized ears flopped down, its dark eyes fixed on his. It didn't bark. It just whined, a sound of profound, preemptive loss. Elias looked from the pills to the dog, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt something other than pain, a flicker of responsibility. He knelt, scooped up the trembling pup, and whispered, "Okay, Odin, okay." Odin grew, and grew. The name, chosen in a moment of bleak irony, became strangely prophetic. He wasn't just large, he was impossibly so. At 6 months, he outweighed a full-grown mastiff. At a year, he could rest his chin on the kitchen counter without stretching. His paws were the size of dinner plates, his bark a resonant boom that shook the floorboards. But his nature was gentle, his intuition profound. It was Odin who, on their long, aimless drives out of the city, began to obsess over the coastline. He would press his enormous head against the window, whining with that same heartbreaking frequency he'd used to save Elias's life, his gaze fixed on one particular point on the horizon, the derelict Blackwood Point lighthouse. Sarah had loved it. She'd had sketches of it, dreamed of buying it, of polishing its great lens until it shone for 100 miles. One afternoon, Odin refused to get back in the truck. He trotted down the overgrown path to the lighthouse and sat before its boarded-up door, looking back at Elias as if to say, "This is it. This is the place." Driven by a ghost of Sarah's dream and the sheer, unexplainable certainty of his dog, Elias drained his savings and bought the ruin. The work was a punishment and a prayer. He started with the grounds, clearing away thorned vines that choked the stone walls. Then he moved inside, prying off rotten boards, shoveling out debris, and battling the decay that mirrored his own. Every splinter, every rusted nail was a small act of penance. Odin was his shadow, a silent foreman. It was the dog who made the first discovery. While Elias struggled to repair the crumbling hearth in the keeper's cottage, Odin began nudging a particular stone with his massive snout, refusing to stop. Annoyed, Elias shoved the stone with his crowbar. It shifted, revealing a dark cavity. Inside was a heavy, oilcloth-wrapped package. He carefully unwrapped it to find a tin box, miraculously preserved. Within the box lay an old leather-bound journal and a rolled-up chart of the winter sky, covered in cryptic notations. That night, by the light of a single lantern, Elias opened the journal. The elegant script belonged to a man named Alistair Finch, the lighthouse keeper from a century ago. It spoke not of weather patterns and passing ships, but of a sacred duty, a guardian's trust, to protect a great fortune from vultures in fine suits, and men who build their empires on broken ground. The star chart was the key. Using the celestial navigation and cryptography skills from his ranger days, Elias spent 3 nights painstakingly decoding the symbols. They weren't stars. They were coordinates, but not for a map. They corresponded to words and page numbers within the journal itself. The decoded message was a directive. Where the light is born, look behind the heart of the storm. His mission, once a simple act of restoration to honor his wife, now felt heavier, imbued with the purpose of a long-dead stranger. The lighthouse wasn't just a building. It was a legacy. Months bled into one another. The physical labor was transformative. Sanding the old cypress floors, he felt the grain of his own life smoothing out. As he reglazed the 100-year-old windows, the world outside seemed to brighten. The lighthouse began to breathe again, and so did he. He spent weeks on the great Fresnel lens, the heart of the storm, polishing each prism with a jeweler's care until it captured the sunlight and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows on the lantern room walls. He was no longer just fixing a structure. He was healing a place and himself along with it. Odin, now a colossus of fur and muscle, was his constant companion, his quiet presence a bulwark against the loneliness that still crept in at night. Their solitary existence was occasionally punctuated by trips to a nearby town for supplies. There, he met Maria, the owner of the local hardware store. A kind woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. She never pressed him about his past, but her questions about the lighthouse's progress were full of genuine interest. She started setting aside salvaged brass fittings for him, leaving a thermos of hot coffee on the counter when he came in. Her simple decency was both a comfort and a terror. It was a connection to a world he had abandoned, a vulnerability he wasn't sure he was ready for. He was rebuilding walls of stone and glass, but the ones around his heart were only just beginning to show cracks. One crisp autumn afternoon, the crunch of tires on the gravel path announced a visitor. A gleaming black Mercedes, starkly out of place, rolled to a stop. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his smile as polished as his shoes. "Elias Thorne?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. "I'm Marcus Vance," he gestured vaguely at the coastline. "My firm is developing a luxury resort community along this stretch. The lighthouse is the last private holding. I have to say, you've done remarkable work." A real passion project. Vance walked around, inspecting the new stonework, his eyes sharp and analytical. He made Elias a stunningly generous offer, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. "Take the money, Mr. Thorne," Vance urged. "Move on. This place is a memory, and you can't live in a memory." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It wasn't just the offer. It was the man's dismissive tone, the way his eyes appraised the lighthouse not as a home, but as an obstacle. Odin, who had been sitting quietly on the porch, rose to his full, intimidating height. He moved to stand between Elias and Vance, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, a sound like distant thunder. Elias placed a hand on Odin's back. "It's not for sale," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Vance's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of cold annoyance. He returned a week later, the pretense of civility gone. "I think you misunderstand the situation, Mr. Thorne," he said, standing so close that Elias could smell his expensive cologne. "I own all the surrounding land. The access road you use? That's my property. I can get a permanent injunction tomorrow. No supplies, no access, nothing. You and your pet will be completely isolated." He paused, letting the threat settle in the air. "Old places like this," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "they have accidents, faulty wiring, a winter storm. It would be a tragedy to see all your hard work go up in smoke." The threat wasn't just about property anymore. It was personal, a violation of the sanctuary Elias had painstakingly built. He saw in Vance's eyes the same predatory emptiness he'd seen in combat, the look of a man who took what he wanted, no matter the cost. Elias felt the old, cold discipline of the ranger settle over him. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a defensive position. He stared back at Vance, his silence a more potent answer than any threat he could voice. The encounter galvanized Elias. He remembered the Keeper's decoded message. Where the light is born, look behind the heart of the storm. The heart of the storm was the Fresnel lens. Behind its complex array of prisms, in the central housing of the rotating mechanism he had so carefully restored, he found a small, cleverly hidden panel. Prying it open, he discovered a second, smaller compartment. Inside was a slim accountant's ledger and a single, faded photograph. The ledger was filled with the same elegant script as the journal, detailing a series of clandestine financial transactions, the transfer of a massive portfolio of bearer bonds, a fortune hidden from Marcus Vance's grandfather. A corrupt shipping magnate Alistair Finch had identified as a vulture. The final pages detailed the method of hiding them within the lighthouse's foundation. But it was the photograph that made the air leave Elias's lungs. It showed Alistair Finch standing proudly with his family in front of the lighthouse, dated decades ago. In the background, leaning against a gleaming black sedan, was a much younger Marcus Vance, smirking at the camera. The car was a perfect match for the fragmented description in the 2-year-old police report from Sarah's accident. The partial plate number he had memorized, the one that had led to 1,000 dead ends, was suddenly horrifyingly visible. It was him. The man trying to steal Sarah's dream was the same man who had stolen her life. The weight of it buckled his knees. The fight for the lighthouse and the fight for Sarah's memory were the same fight. The wound and the stakes had fused into one. The path forward was brutally clear. The police would be useless against a man with Vance's power and resources. The photograph was circumstantial, the ledger from the past. Justice would not be found in a courtroom. It would be found here, in the place Sarah loved, the fortress he had rebuilt with his own hands. The grief that had paralyzed him for 2 years transformed into a cold, focused resolve. His past as a ranger, a source of so much pain and trauma, now became his greatest asset. He was no longer just a restorer, he was a defender. He spent the next 48 hours turning the lighthouse and its grounds into a tactical landscape. He rewired the main beacon to a secondary generator, controllable from a hidden switch. He rigged a system of solar-powered floodlights to create disorienting zones of light and shadow. He used his knowledge of mechanics to weaken a section of the spiral staircase, creating a trap. He positioned tripwires connected to old ship bells in the dense woods surrounding the property. The lighthouse was no longer just a beacon of light. It was an instrument of his design, and he knew every inch of it, every echo, every blind spot. He was preparing for a siege, not with the intent to kill, but to capture, to expose, to finally bring the truth into the light. The storm rolled in on the third night, an atmospheric echo of the violence to come. Rain lashed against the thick glass of the lantern room as Vance and 2 hired thugs, clad in black, cut the main power line at the road. The lights in the Keeper's cottage died, plunging the property into darkness. It was the signal. Elias, positioned at the top of the tower, flipped the hidden switch. The backup generator roared to life, and the great lighthouse beam sliced through the tempest, a brilliant, sweeping blade of light. He watched as the men, momentarily blinded, scrambled for cover. Using the beam like a spotlight, he guided them toward the wooded path where he had laid his traps. The clang of a ship's bell echoed through the storm, followed by a curse. One down. He swung the beam again, catching the second man near the cottage. A series of powerful, motion-activated strobes Elias had mounted flashed erratically, disorienting him long enough for Elias to descend the stairs, silent as a wraith, and neutralize him with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious. That left Vance. He found him at the base of the tower, trying to force the heavy oak door. Elias opened it from within. "You wanted the lighthouse, Vance," he said, his voice calm amidst the howl of the wind. "Come and get it." The final confrontation took place on the winding, narrow staircase, a vertical battlefield. Vance was younger, but Elias was smarter, using the tight confines to his advantage. The fight ended in the lantern room, the storm raging outside, the massive lens rotating between them, casting hypnotic, shifting shadows. Vance, bloodied and desperate, pulled a gun. He backed Elias against the railing of the outer catwalk. "This all ends now," Vance snarled, raising the pistol. At that precise moment, a soundless shape, darker than the storm, launched through the open doorway. Odin, who had been waiting with perfect discipline at the base of the tower, hit Vance with the force of a freight train. The impact sent the man crashing into the iron railing, the gun clattering across the wet metal floor. Vance stared in pure terror as the giant dog stood over him, a growl vibrating through the very structure of the tower, a sound of primal, unwavering loyalty. With Vance and his men bound and the local sheriff on his way, the storm began to break. The evidence Elias had compiled, the ledgers, the photograph, and a recorded confession from a terrified Vance, was undeniable. The truth of Sarah's death was finally brought into the light, and the hidden fortune of bearer bonds was recovered from a secret compartment in the lighthouse foundation. The story of the stoic veteran and his giant, guardian dog became a local legend. But for Elias, the victory wasn't in the money or the retribution. It was in the quiet dawn that followed the storm. He had faced the man who caused his deepest wound and had not been consumed by the same darkness. He had defended his wife's legacy and, in doing so, had finally redeemed his own. The lighthouse beam, now a steady and brilliant pulse, swept across the calm sea. Elias stood on the catwalk, a hand resting on Odin's powerful back, the cool metal of the railing under his other palm. The Sarah Thorne Foundation had already broken ground on its first two projects, restoring a historic town library and building a state-of-the-art equine therapy center for veterans. The money, the $200 million in bearer bonds, had been a tool, not a prize. Its true value was in the legacy it now built, a legacy of healing and preservation, a testament to a love that even death could not extinguish. Justice had been served not through vengeance, but through creation. The light pulsed, a heartbeat against the darkness, a promise kept. What did you think of Elias and Odin's journey? The bond between a person and a loyal animal can be one of the most powerful forces for healing in the world, and we believe stories like this are a testament to that truth. We would be honored to read your story in the comments. Please don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates hope, resilience, and the unwavering spirit of a good dog. We'll see you in the next one.